Something. So going down for Sunday roast?
Yeah, Sunday roast.
You look tiny.
Oh, thank you. Tiny. I've never been called tiny. I feel really flattered now. Thanks.
You're welcome.
That's lovely.
It's not bad for her.
It's a good one, actually.
In 2013, the United Kingdom was confronted with one of its most shocking modern murder cases, not only because of the brutality of the crimes, but because of the woman at the center of it all. Joanna Dennehy was just 31 years old when she embarked on a killing spree that left 3 men dead and 2 others gravely injured. What made her case infamous was not just the body count, but the chilling way she carried herself. Smiling selfies after murder, flirtatious banter with police, and a complete lack of remorse that stunned even hardened detectives. Joanna Dennehy grew up in Hertfordshire, England. As a child, she was described as bright and well-spoken, but by her teenage years, she had drifted into rebellion, heavy drinking, and erratic behavior. Friends later said she loved to be the center of attention, had a sharp wit, and could charm almost anyone. But beneath the surface was a growing instability. She ran away from home as a teenager, entered toxic relationships, and eventually lost custody of her children. By her late 20s, she was living on the margins, jobless, transient, and increasingly drawn to chaos. Her crimes began in March 2013 in Peterborough, Cambridgeshire. Over the span of just 10 days, she murdered 3 men. The first victim was Łukasz Slabaszewski, a Polish national who had befriended her. She lured him to a property, stabbed him, and dumped his body in a ditch. Days later, she killed her housemate, John Chapman, a 56-year-old Falklands War veteran. Not long after, she murdered her landlord, Kevin Lee, a 48-year-old property developer. Lee's body was found in a ditch, dressed in a black sequin dress, a bizarre and humiliating detail that investigators later pointed to as evidence of Joanna's sadistic sense of humor. But Joanna wasn't done. After killing 3 men in Peterborough, she fled with 2 accomplices and randomly targeted strangers. She attacked Robin Barraza, a 63-year-old dog walker, stabbing him repeatedly on the street. Miraculously, he survived. Later the same day, she attacked 56-year-old John Rogers, who was walking his dog. He too survived after emergency surgery. Police quickly launched a nationwide manhunt, warning the public that a dangerous and unpredictable woman was on the loose. What shocked investigators wasn't just the murders, it was Joanna's demeanor. Most killers, when caught, show at least some degree of shame, fear, or regret. Joanna displayed none. She joked with police, smiled in mugshots, and even flirted with officers. At one point, she told a psychiatrist that she killed simply for the fun of it. She compared herself to Bonnie from Bonnie and Clyde, romanticizing her spree as though it were a rebellious adventure. Her lack of remorse and her enjoyment of the chaos set her apart from nearly every other female killer in British criminal history. Her trial, in 2014, became a media spectacle. Joanna refused to attend most of the proceedings, claiming she didn't need to hear the evidence against her. When she did appear, she seemed more interested in her appearance and the attention she received than in the charges. The prosecution painted her as a cold-blooded killer who sought excitement through violence. Her defense team didn't argue innocence. They focused instead on her mental state, pointing to diagnosed personality disorders. But mental illness alone couldn't explain the relish with which she described her crimes. In February 2014, Joanna Dennehy pleaded guilty to 3 murders and 2 attempted murders. The judge handed her a rare whole-life order, one of only a handful ever given to a woman in the UK. This means she will never be released from prison under any circumstances. What makes Joanna Dennehy's case so unforgettable is not just the violence, but the performance around it. She didn't kill quietly or reluctantly. She killed with a smile, with flair, and with a desire to be remembered. In many ways, she treated her crimes like theater, where shock value and control were the goals. Today, Joanna Dennehy remains behind bars, serving a sentence that guarantees she will die in prison. Her story is a reminder that killers don't always fit a profile, and that sometimes the most terrifying motive is also the simplest: killing for the fun of it. In Japan, where crime rates are among the lowest in the world and homicide cases are rare, the story of Kanae Kijima became a national obsession. She wasn't a masked attacker or a shadowy figure in the night. Instead, she was a young woman who presented herself as a doting fiancée, eager to settle down with men she met through dating and marriage-hunting websites. But behind that image, she was orchestrating a deadly con. Between 2007 and 2009, 3 men ended up dead, poisoned with sleeping pills and gas, their deaths staged to look like suicides. Kijima became known as Japan's Black Widow, a label reserved for women who kill partners for financial gain. Kanae Kijima was born in 1975 in Hokkaido. She was described as intelligent and sociable, but as she grew older, she cultivated a taste for luxury far beyond her means. She craved expensive restaurants, designer bags, and the lifestyle of wealth and security she believed she deserved. But she didn't want to work for it. Instead, she decided to take it from men willing to spend money on love. She began using konkatsu services, matchmaking and marriage-hunting websites popular in Japan, to meet men who were lonely, financially stable, and eager to find a wife. Kanae would present herself as warm, caring, and ready for marriage. She played the role perfectly, convincing men that she was genuinely invested in building a future with them. Once they were emotionally hooked, she began exploiting them financially, borrowing money or coaxing them into spending lavishly on her. But her manipulation went beyond fraud. In 2007, 53-year-old Takao Terada was found dead in his car in Saitama Prefecture. The scene looked like suicide by charcoal burning, a method tragically common in Japan at the time. At first, police accepted it as self-inflicted, but months later, suspicions began to grow when similar cases emerged. In 2008, 80-year-old Kenzo Ando died in his home under eerily similar circumstances. Then, in 2009, 41-year-old Yoshiyuki Oide was found dead in his car. Each man had been romantically involved with Kanae Kijima. Each had spent money on her, and each death had been staged to look like suicide. But investigators dug deeper. The pattern became undeniable. All 3 men had transferred money to Kijima or had been pressured by her to fund her lifestyle. Autopsies revealed traces of sleeping pills, suggesting they had been incapacitated before their deaths. Police concluded that Kanae had drugged the men and then staged their deaths, leaving them in cars with burning charcoal or in settings meant to suggest self-harm. Her aim was simple: financial gain, coupled with freedom from the men once she had drained them of resources. Her arrest in 2009 became a media spectacle. Japan's press dubbed her the marriage-hunting killer, playing on the irony of a woman who used dating services not to find love, but to orchestrate murder. The trial that followed gripped the country. Prosecutors painted her as manipulative, cold, and motivated by greed. They presented evidence of her lavish spending, her lies about her background, and the eerie similarities between the deaths. Kanae denied the charges. She insisted the men had taken their own lives and that she was merely unlucky to have been romantically linked to them before their deaths. But the evidence was too strong. Testimony from acquaintances revealed how she boasted about money, lied about pregnancies, and spun elaborate stories to keep men attached. Her search history showed research into suicide methods and sleeping pills, and the financial records laid bare how much she had gained from her victims. In 2012, the Tokyo District Court found her guilty of the 3 murders and sentenced her to death. The presiding judge described her actions as cruel and cunning, emphasizing that she preyed on lonely men for selfish motives. Her demeanor during the trial, often calm, Even smiling only fueled public anger. Kanae appealed her conviction, but in 2015, Japan's Supreme Court upheld the death sentence. With that, her fate was sealed. She would join the small but infamous list of women on Japan's death row. Execution in Japan is carried out by hanging, and prisoners are typically not told their execution date until the morning it happens. For Kanae, that uncertainty is now her reality. For many, though, the case was a cultural shock, a reminder that even in one of the world's safest societies, predators can hide behind the most ordinary masks.
I'm sorry, I'm probably gonna pass gas with him tonight.
That's fine. So,
And they fired, and I'll have to apologize for that.
there we go. Except for,
Where's my burger?
For nearly a decade, a trusted nurse in Ontario, Canada, carried out one of the most disturbing killing sprees in the country's history, not in dark alleys or hidden houses, but inside the very nursing homes where society's most vulnerable expected safety and care. Her name was Elizabeth Wettlaufer, and between 2007 and 2016, she murdered 8 elderly patients and attempted to kill several more. Her weapon wasn't a gun or a knife. It was insulin, injected in doses meant not to heal, but to end lives. Elizabeth Wettlaufer was born in 1967 and grew up in a conservative, religious household. By most accounts, she was intelligent, creative, and quick-witted, but she also struggled with her identity, her sexuality, and her place in the world. As she entered adulthood, she developed addictions to alcohol and painkillers and cycled through depression and unstable relationships. Nursing seemed like a calling for her, a way to help, to connect, and to give meaning to her life. But in practice, it became the stage for her darkest impulses. In 2007, Wettlaufer began working at long-term care homes in Ontario. Her job gave her constant access to patients, medication, and most importantly, insulin. She soon discovered that insulin overdoses were the perfect crime. Too much of the hormone could send a frail patient into a fatal spiral of seizures, confusion, and organ failure. For elderly residents already struggling with multiple health issues, the cause of death often looked natural. Doctors rarely questioned it. Families mourned quietly, accepting the deaths as inevitable. Behind the mask of a caregiver, Elizabeth had found a way to kill without suspicion. Her first known victim was 84-year-old James Silcox, a World War II veteran. In 2007, she injected him with a massive dose of insulin, and he died soon after. She later admitted that she felt a surge of power from ending his life, a chilling remark that prosecutors would later highlight. Over the next 9 years, she repeated this process again and again, targeting elderly men and women under her care. Some victims were in pain, others were not. Some she claimed she killed to ease suffering, but she also admitted that often it was simply an impulse she couldn't resist. The deaths added up quietly. Arpad Horvath, 75, Gladys Millard, 87, Maurice Grunet, 84, Mary Zurowinski, 95, Helen Matheson, 95, Helen Young, 90, Maureen Pickering, 79. In each case, the family was left grieving what they thought was a natural end. No one suspected that the woman adjusting their loved one's IV or charting their vitals had injected them with a lethal dose. Wettlaufer even attended some of the funerals, playing the role of a kind nurse devastated by the loss of her patient. Unlike most serial killers, Elizabeth wasn't caught by forensic evidence or a sudden mistake. She turned herself in. By 2016, guilt and paranoia began to eat away at her. She confessed her crimes to friends, to pastors, and eventually to police. She sat down with investigators and calmly described how she had poisoned her patients, explaining the process in clinical detail. When interviewed about why she did it, Elizabeth sometimes gave vague answers about relieving suffering. Other times, She admitted she killed simply because the urge came over her. She admitted to 8 murders and several attempted murders, including 2 residents she tried to overdose but who survived. Her confessions stunned Canada. Nurses are supposed to embody compassion and care, yet here was a professional openly admitting that she had turned her skills and access into tools of death. Investigators later said that without her confession, the crimes might never have been solved. The medical evidence was too murky, and the victims too old and frail to raise red flags. In court, Wettlaufer pleaded guilty to 8 counts of first-degree murder, 4 counts of attempted murder, and 2 counts of aggravated assault. She was sentenced in 2017 to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years, one of the harshest penalties in Canada, a country that doesn't have the death penalty. During sentencing, family members of the victims packed the courtroom. They described the devastating betrayal of trust, how they had believed their loved ones were safe, only to learn years later that the very person meant to protect them had been their killer. For many, the hardest part wasn't just the loss, but the thought that the deaths had been preventable, that the system had failed to catch the warning signs. The case triggered a national reckoning in Canada. The fallout was severe. Nursing homes across Canada faced new rules for tracking medication, mandatory reporting for unusual deaths, and stricter oversight. Families became more vocal, demanding transparency and accountability. Her case forces a question that still unsettles families and policymakers. How many more deaths in nursing homes might be something other than natural? And how do you guard against killers who don't stalk the night, but wear scrubs, punch the clock, and smile as they administer a final, solid dose?
You can't change the core nature of somebody, and I think the core nature of Catherine is bad.
In the mid-1980s, Australia was gripped by a wave of fear, unlike anything it had seen before. The country had known its share of violent criminals, but what unfolded in Perth in 1986 was something different. A partnership so twisted, so predatory, that it forever scarred the nation's memory. This was the story of David and Catherine Birnie, known for the Moorhouse murders, a husband and wife team who abducted, assaulted, and murdered women in a killing spree that shocked the world. Catherine wasn't just a bystander. She wasn't a frightened partner dragged along by a violent man. She was an equal participant, a woman who chose to help lure victims, to restrain them, and to watch them die. In some cases, she even helped prepare the tools of their captivity. Her willingness to participate and her utter lack of remorse made her one of the most infamous female criminals in Australian history. The story began in October 1986. David and Catherine Birnie lived together at a house on Moorhouse Street in the Perth suburb of Willagee. Outwardly, they looked like a rough but ordinary couple. In reality, they had constructed a fantasy world of domination and violence, one that they decided to make real. They began targeting young women, driving around the city looking for potential victims. Their method was chillingly simple. Catherine, playing the role of a friendly woman, would persuade women to accept a ride from them. Once inside the car, the victims were taken back to the Birnie's house, where the horror began. Over the course of 5 weeks, the couple abducted at least 4 women. The victims were restrained, assaulted, and ultimately killed. Their bodies were disposed of in shallow graves in bushland around Perth. Investigators later described the Birnie's home as a house of horrors, a place where fantasy and sadism merged into real-world brutality. What made Catherine's role particularly disturbing was her active participation. Unlike the stereotype of an abused partner too afraid to resist, Catherine appeared to embrace the crimes. She helped lure the women. She stood by during the assaults. She watched David kill them and sometimes encouraged it. Survivors and investigators described her as calm, even cold, in the face of unspeakable violence. The Birnie's reign of terror might have continued if not for one extraordinary survivor. On November 10th, 1986, they abducted 17-year-old Kate Moore. Using their usual tactic, Catherine reassured her that she'd be safe, convincing her to accept a lift. Once inside the house, Kate was restrained and assaulted like the others. But unlike the previous victims, she saw a chance to escape. When David left for work the next morning, Catherine failed to keep her secure. Kate managed to flee the house barefoot and terrified, running to a nearby store where she told police everything. Her testimony broke the case open. Police raided the Birnies' home, uncovering evidence that tied them to the missing women. They found personal belongings, restraints, and other items that confirmed the survivors' accounts. Both David and Catherine were arrested. During questioning, David quickly confessed to the murders. Catherine, at first, tried to minimize her role, portraying herself as an unwilling accomplice. But the evidence was overwhelming, and her story didn't match her actions. In 1987, the Birnies were charged with multiple counts of abduction and murder. Their trial revealed the chilling details of their partnership, how they fed off each other's sadism, how Catherine actively participated in luring victims, and how she showed little emotion as the details of the crimes were laid out in court. The public, and especially the families of the victims, were horrified not just by what had happened, but by the fact that a woman had taken part so willingly. It shattered the illusion that female killers were rare anomalies or that women could only kill under duress. David Birnie received multiple life sentences, but in 2005, he took his own life in prison. Catherine, however, remains incarcerated. She was given a strict security life sentence with a unique condition attached. She is officially marked as never to be released. That label is reserved for the worst of the worst in Australia's justice system, and it ensures that Catherine Birnie will die behind bars. Over the years, she has made multiple parole applications, each one sparking national outrage. Every bid for release has been rejected. The Australian public views her as beyond redemption, a woman who had every chance to stop the crimes, but chose instead to be a willing partner in them. The Birnies case left scars far deeper than the individual tragedies. It changed the way Australians thought about crime, trust, and safety. Young women in Perth suddenly looked at lifts from strangers with new fear. Parents warned their children more urgently than ever before. The image of Catherine, a woman smiling reassuringly as she helped lure victims to their deaths, became a symbol of betrayal.
Me pegaba, y siempre me maldecía. Ella me regaló con un señor grande y yo fui abusada. Yo sé que no es excusa, que no merezco perdón ni de Dios ni de nadie, pero ya lo hice.
In Mexico City, during the late 1990s and early 2000s, fear gripped the capital as elderly women, abuelas, the backbone of families and neighborhoods, were being murdered in their own homes. The press nicknamed the killer La Mataviejitas, the little old lady killer. For years, police struggled to catch the culprit, chasing misleading clues and even arresting the wrong people. But when the truth came out, it shocked the entire country. The killer was Juana Barraza, a former professional wrestler who turned her strength and cunning into one of Mexico's most chilling crime sprees. Juana Barraza was born in 1957 in poverty, with a childhood marked by abuse and instability. She grew up tough, learning to survive by any means necessary. As a young woman, she turned to lucha libre, Mexican professional wrestling, where she fought in arenas under the ring name La Dama del Silencio, the Lady of Silence. She wore a mask, strutted into the ring, and played the role of a villain, using brute force to win over jeering crowds. Wrestling gave her power and an identity, but outside the ring, her life was unraveling. She struggled with failed relationships, low-paying jobs, and the crushing weight of poverty. By the late 1990s, Barraza was desperate and angry. She began targeting elderly women who lived alone. Many of these women trusted her, either because she posed as a nurse, a government worker offering welfare assistance, or simply a friendly face willing to help with chores. Once she gained entry to their homes, she would overpower them with sheer physical strength. Her victims were often strangled with cords, scarves, or her bare hands. Then she would steal money, small valuables, or identification papers, enough to sustain her, but never large fortunes. For years, the murders baffled police. The victims shared a profile: elderly women living alone. Crime scenes showed signs of forced entry or deception. Witnesses occasionally described seeing a tall, broad-shouldered woman leaving the area, but investigators refused to believe that the killer could be female. Their bias misled the investigation, with police at one point even arresting a transgender woman, wrongly assuming she matched the vague descriptions. Meanwhile, Juana kept killing. Between 1998 and 2006, she is believed to have murdered at least 11 women, though some investigators suspect the number may be much higher, possibly in the dozens. The scale of the crimes, combined with the failure of authorities to catch her, created panic in Mexico City. Headlines screamed about La Mataviejitas, and elderly women lived in fear, locking doors and windows, suspicious of even the most innocent knocks at the door. Juana's arrest finally came in January 2006. Police were called after neighbors heard screams coming from the home of 82-year-old Ana Maria de los Reyes Alfaro. Juana was caught fleeing the scene, and inside, officers found the body of the elderly woman. She was caught red-handed, and her time as La Mataviejitas was over. During interrogation, Barraza admitted to some of the killings but denied others. She was defiant, insisting she wasn't the monster the press made her out to be. Psychologists later suggested that her crimes stemmed in part from a deep hatred of her own mother, who had abused and abandoned her. In elderly women, she may have seen a reflection of that betrayal, a rage she acted out again and again. Her trial was one of the most sensational in Mexican history. The courtroom was packed with reporters, and every detail was splashed across front pages. The prosecution laid out the evidence: her fingerprints at crime scenes, stolen items found in her possession, and eyewitness testimony linking her to multiple murders. The defense tried to argue that she had been unfairly demonized, that not every crime could be pinned on her. But in 2008, the court delivered its verdict. Juana Barraza was found guilty of 16 murders and 12 robberies. Her sentence was staggering: 759 years in prison. While Mexican law caps actual time served at 60 years, the symbolic weight of the sentence sent a clear message: she would never walk free again. The case left deep scars on Mexico City. For years, citizens questioned how such a killing spree could go on so long without resolution. The investigation exposed flaws in the justice system, biases against the idea of female killers, and a tendency to blame marginalized groups rather than follow the evidence. Juana Barraza remains in prison to this day, a notorious figure whose story is told in documentaries, books, and endless news reports. Juana Barraza, La Mataviejitas, turned the strength that once earned her applause into a weapon of fear, leaving behind a legacy of betrayal that will never be forgotten in Mexico's history of crime. In the 1970s, a sweet-talking, church-going grandmother from North Carolina shocked America by becoming the first woman executed in the United States after the death penalty was reinstated. Her name was Velma Barfield, and behind her soft voice and prime manners was a cold-blooded poisoner who killed the people closest to her: husbands, lovers, and even her own mother. Velma's story began like many others in small-town America. She grew up poor, in a strict household, and married young. By her 40s, she was known in her community as a devoted churchgoer, someone who dressed modestly and sang hymns. But behind closed doors, her personal life was chaotic. She struggled with chronic illness, depression, and a serious addiction to prescription drugs. She relied on pills to cope, and as her need for money grew, so did her willingness to exploit and destroy the people around her. Her weapon of choice was poison, specifically arsenic-based rat poison that was cheap and easy to find in local stores. Velma perfected a chilling method. She would bake food or prepare drinks laced with poison, serve it to her unsuspecting victim, and watch as their health spiraled downward. They would develop painful gastrointestinal symptoms that looked like natural illness. Doctors were misled, families were distracted, and Velma would quietly step in as the grieving widow, the caring daughter, or the sympathetic girlfriend. The first major death that raised questions was her mother, Lillian. In 1974, Lillian suddenly fell violently ill and died. At the time, no one suspected foul play. After all, she was older and had health issues. Velma played the role of devastated daughter, mourning with the community. But just a year later, in 1975, another person close to Velma died. Her second husband, Jennings Barfield. He was only in his mid-50s when he developed similar mysterious symptoms and died suddenly. Again, doctors chalked it up to natural causes. Over the next few years, Velma entered into relationships with several men, and each one seemed to meet the same tragic fate. One of them was Stuart Taylor, a man she had been dating for several years. He trusted Velma with his finances and his health. When he began suffering from agonizing stomach pains, no one suspected that the meals she lovingly prepared were slowly killing him. Taylor's death in 1978 finally triggered suspicion. Autopsy results revealed lethal levels of arsenic in his system. Investigators exhumed the bodies of other men in Velma's life, and the pattern became undeniable. Prosecutors charged her with murder, focusing on the death of Stuart Taylor, though she would eventually confess to several more killings. During interrogation, Velma admitted that she had poisoned at least 4 people, though investigators suspected the true number could have been higher. She claimed she never meant to kill them, that her goal was to make them sick so she could nurse them back to health and win their sympathy. But the evidence showed a different picture. Velma repeatedly poisoned people she relied on financially or emotionally, and when they were dead, she collected insurance money, forged checks, or simply moved on to her next victim. Her trial was swift, and the jury did not buy the image of Velma as a frail, addicted woman who lost control. They saw her as a calculating predator who exploited the trust of loved ones for money and convenience. In 1978, she was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. The verdict shocked the public. This wasn't the typical image of a killer. She was a grandmother, soft-spoken, always polite. Yet the evidence was overwhelming, and the court decided she was too dangerous to ever walk free again. What made Velma's case even more infamous was the timing. In 1976, the US Supreme Court had reinstated the death penalty after nearly a decade-long moratorium. Velma became the first woman in modern America to face execution under the new rules. That fact alone drew nationwide attention, with reporters flooding the small North Carolina courthouse and protesters gathering outside the prison gates. During her years on death row, Velma underwent a dramatic transformation. She became deeply religious, teaching Bible study to fellow inmates and earning the nickname Death Row Granny. Religious groups rallied to her defense, arguing that she had repented and deserved mercy. But for the families of her victims, her conversion meant nothing. On November 2nd, 1984, Velma Barfield was executed by lethal injection at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. She was 52 years old. In her final statement, she asked for forgiveness and expressed love for her family.
He gave us permission to dig around in the yard and look around. And then we dig, and lo and behold, we find what looks like the remains of a human being.
Sir, I have never killed anybody.
She called herself a landlady, a matronly presence, in a tidy little house on F Street in Sacramento. Neighbors saw a neat yard, a kindly woman who took in boarders and helped them with errands. To the city's most vulnerable, the elderly, the mentally ill, people down on their luck, She offered shelter, a bed, sometimes a listening ear. But behind that apron and those polite smiles, something much darker was growing. Dorothea Puente built an entire life around two things: appearances and opportunity. She learned to be useful. She learned to make people trust her. In the 1980s, she ran a boarding house for people cast aside by society, the kind of people social systems fail and families forget. They arrived with little money, fragile health, messy pasts. They needed care. They also had checks, small pensions, and, crucially, no one watching closely when they disappeared. The pattern starts slowly, almost imperceptibly. A tenant moves in. They cash their check. Dorothea does the chores, pays the bills, and deposits the money into her account. Then, something changes. The tenant stops answering the door. Mail piles up. Dorothea calls officials, arranges for a burial, or simply says they moved away. To outsiders, it's a sad but ordinary rite of decline. To Dorothea, it was a transaction completed and a problem solved. It wasn't until neighbors began to notice odd things in her yard, fresh dirt, small disturbances around the flower beds, that suspicions were raised. An alert neighbor mentioned a smell. Someone noticed that some of Dorothea's tenants, previously seen at the mailbox, had simply vanished. The more detectives dug into the boarding house ledger and the bank records, the more the pattern emerged. Pensions were being collected, benefits rerouted, and no one could account for where the money and the people had gone. When police got a search warrant for Dorothea Puente's property at 1426 F Street, what they found stopped many in their tracks. The yard, the very place she'd kept petunias and garden gnomes, had been used as a graveyard. Human remains were discovered buried beneath the soil. In one small, tidy Sacramento yard, the bones of Dorothea's victims were found, a macabre contrast to the neat picket fence and immaculate porch. The scene revealed a calculated, clinical pattern. She'd taken in people who were easy to exploit, removed them from the world, and covered the tracks with earth and a practiced hand. During the trial, prosecutors painted a portrait of a woman who used her domestic skills as a weapon. Dorothea didn't fit the stereotype of a rampaging killer. She fit something more unsettling, someone who weaponized trust and charity for personal gain. The prosecution's case focused on motive and method. They showed bank statements, deposit records, and a ledger of payments made by the missing tenants. Defense lawyers tried to explain it away, claims of dementia, of being a woman overwhelmed by caretaking, of not understanding medical matters. But jurors, when faced with the holes in Dorothea's explanations and the weight of financial evidence, found the picture too coherent to dismiss. She was sentenced to life without parole, a sentence that reflected the court's view of the cold, predatory pattern she'd set in motion. Dorothea herself remained, in many ways, a mystery. In interviews and in court, she could be composed, even matter-of-fact, as if recounting her life was a ledger to balance. When she died in custody in 2011, it closed the biographical book, but not the questions the case raised. The headlines cooled, but the issues persisted. How communities protect the elderly, how oversight can be tightened, how relatives can be notified more reliably. The lesson, after all the evidence and the trial and the grave dug in a tidy Sacramento yard, is this: evil can wear an apron, keep a garden, and answer the door with a smile. The trick is to notice when appearances don't line up with the ledger.
When I was 13, I was introduced to prostitution by my stepmother, Rosemary. I was undressed by my stepmother, and my father was in the room. It was a separate room. And I was just thinking, I wish I could die. I just hurt so much.
To the neighbours on Cromwell Street in Gloucester, England, Fred and Rosemary West looked like just another working-class couple. They had children, they smiled in family photos, and they lived in a modest home. But behind that door, at 25 Cromwell Street, something unspeakable was happening. A horror that would eventually earn Rosemary West a rare, whole-life tariff, ensuring she will die behind bars. Rosemary was born in 1953 in Devon, into a family already haunted by violence and dysfunction. Her father was a paranoid schizophrenic with a violent temper, and her mother received electroconvulsive therapy while pregnant with her. Those dark beginnings shaped Rosemary, but what followed went far beyond a tragic childhood. By the age of 15, Rosemary had fallen under the spell of an older man, Frederick West. He was 12 years her senior, already married, already violent, and already obsessed with control. Together, they would become one of Britain's most infamous killer couples. Their home soon turned into a trap. On the outside, it looked ordinary. On the inside, it was a prison for victims, many of them young women, and even members of their own family. The couple lured girls with promises of lodging, jobs, or simple friendship. Once inside, there was no escape. One of the earliest known victims was Charmaine West, Fred's 8-year-old stepdaughter from a previous relationship. In 1971, while Fred was serving time for theft, Charmaine vanished. Neighbors later testified they saw Rosemary beating her regularly, and when Fred was released from prison, Charmaine was gone. Decades later, her body was found buried under the floorboards of their previous home. But the Wests didn't stop there. In 1971, Fred's first wife, Rena, also disappeared. Her remains were discovered buried in a field. Investigators later concluded that Rosemary had been involved. The pattern was set. By the mid-1970s, Cromwell Street became known as the House of Horrors. Victims included lodgers, nannies, runaways, and even their own daughter, Heather West. Many were subjected to unimaginable cruelty before being murdered. Their bodies were dismembered and buried in the cellar, the garden, or under a bathroom floor. One chilling detail still haunts investigators. Whenever the Wests ran out of burial space, they simply dug new graves beneath their own children's bedrooms. For years, the kids living in the house had no idea that beneath their floors lay the remains of their siblings, babysitters, and family friends. The ultimate betrayal came in 1987, when 16-year-old Heather West tried to escape. Fred and Rosemary decided she was a liability. One evening, she vanished. For years, the other children were threatened. If they ever misbehaved, they would end up under the patio, like Heather. That chilling phrase became a dark family secret. It wasn't until 1992, when one of the West children reported abuse to authorities, that police began to seriously investigate. The following years saw a slow unraveling of the nightmare. By 1994, police had enough evidence to begin digging at Cromwell Street. What they uncovered horrified even the most seasoned detectives. Over the course of several days, investigators unearthed multiple bodies. In total, 12 young women and girls were discovered, though police believed the real number could be higher. Fred West was arrested first. He confessed to multiple murders, but his story constantly shifted. Rosemary, meanwhile, denied everything. She maintained the image of a loyal wife, insisting she had no knowledge of Fred's crimes. But the evidence told a different story. Survivors and witnesses testified that Rosemary had not only known about the killings, she had participated. The trial of Rosemary West in 1995 became one of the most watched in British history. The prosecution painted her as every bit as sadistic as Fred. Jurors heard shocking details of the abuse she inflicted, both alone and alongside her husband. They were shown photographs of the house, the cellar, and the grim discoveries beneath. Fred never stood trial. On New Year's Day 1995, while awaiting trial in prison, he took his own life. That left Rosemary to face justice alone. For weeks, the courtroom listened to the horrifying accounts of torture, murder, and betrayal. The evidence was overwhelming. On November 22, 1995, Rosemary West was found guilty of 10 murders, including those of her daughter Heather, her stepdaughter Charmaine, and several lodgers. She received a life sentence with a rare whole life tariff, meaning she will never, under any circumstances, be released. Today, Rosemary West is one of only a handful of women in the United Kingdom serving a whole life order. She remains incarcerated at Newhall Prison in West Yorkshire. She's in her 70s now, but she will die behind bars. The legacy of 25 Cromwell Street lingers. The house itself was demolished in 1996, the site paved over to prevent it from becoming a macabre tourist attraction. But for the families of the victims, the scars remain. They remember daughters and sisters who vanished after answering an ad, or who trusted a seemingly ordinary couple offering a spare room. What makes Rosemary West's story so terrifying isn't just the number of lives lost. It's that she was a mother, a neighbor, a woman who seemed to live an ordinary life while hiding unthinkable crimes. Behind the curtains of 25 Cromwell Street, she and her husband turned a family home into one of Britain's darkest crime scenes. And unlike Fred, who escaped justice through death, Rosemary West will never escape. Every day of her life is now spent in a cell, locked away forever, a reminder that evil can hide in plain sight, even in the shape of a mother and wife.
They told me that there would be a lot more deaths and that I've been linked to somebody that was there for a lot of them.
Did you have any concerns that there was a rise in the mortality rate?
Yes.
Okay, so tell me about that. What concerns did you have?
I think we'd all just noticed as a team in general, the nursing staff, that this was a rise compared to previous years.
Hospitals are supposed to be sanctuaries, the place where fragile lives are saved, where parents hand over their newborns and trust that everything possible will be done to protect them. But in Chester, England, between 2015 and 2016, that trust was betrayed in one of the most chilling ways imaginable. Lucy Letby was not a shadowy stranger lurking outside the hospital. She was a neonatal nurse, trained, trusted, and celebrated for her dedication. Smiling in photographs, she looked like the picture of compassion. To the outside world, she was a gentle caregiver for premature and sick infants. But inside the neonatal unit, investigators would later discover she was systematically murdering the very babies she was meant to save. The suspicions began quietly. Doctors noticed that infants who had been stable suddenly collapsed without explanation. Monitors showed sudden drops in oxygen, but post-mortems often failed to identify clear causes. At first, the tragedies were written off as the heartbreaking risks of premature birth. But when the same nurse appeared again and again on shift, doubts grew. In June 2015, a pair of twins were admitted to the Countess of Chester Hospital. One twin died unexpectedly, and just hours later, the second collapsed in the same mysterious way. The same nurse had been present for both. By the end of that year, more infants had suffered sudden collapses, and more families were left grieving without answers. Doctors began tracking the shifts, and a disturbing pattern emerged. The collapses almost always occurred when Lucy Letby was on duty. At first, colleagues hesitated to believe it. Nurses are supposed to be angels of care. The idea that one of their own could be causing harm was unthinkable. But as the deaths mounted, the evidence became undeniable. Lucy Letby was arrested in 2018. What followed was one of the longest and most shocking trials in British legal history. The prosecution laid out a chilling case. She had murdered 7 babies and attempted to kill 7 more. Her methods varied, sometimes injecting air into a child's bloodstream, sometimes overfeeding them with milk, sometimes using insulin. Investigators described her as meticulous, adapting her methods to avoid detection, and striking when parents had stepped away. The courtroom heard devastating testimony. Parents described how their healthy newborns suddenly collapsed in Letby's care. One father recalled walking into the unit to find his infant son fighting for his life, with Letby standing nearby, calm and expressionless. Another family spoke about twins they lost within hours of each other, after being reassured by Letby that they were doing fine. That perhaps the most haunting evidence came from Letby's own words. Police found handwritten notes in her home. Scrawled in ink were phrases like, "I am evil, I did this, and I don't deserve to live." At the same time, other notes painted her as a victim, insisting she hadn't harmed anyone. To the jury, the contradictions revealed the mind of a woman tormented by her own crimes, but unable to stop. In August 2023, Lucy Letby was convicted on 7 counts of murder and 7 counts of attempted murder. The judge handed down a whole life order, the harshest sentence in the United Kingdom, ensuring she will never be released. She became only the 4th woman in British history to receive such a sentence. But her story didn't end there. In 2024, she faced a retrial for the attempted murder of another premature baby, known publicly only as Child K. In July 2024, the jury found her guilty. The judge added another whole life order, bringing her total to 15. The scale of her crimes shocked Britain. Parents who once trusted her now live with the trauma of having left their babies in her care. Hospitals across the country faced renewed scrutiny, with calls for stronger safeguards and better whistleblower protections. And the public asked the same question over and over. Why? To this day, Lucy Letby has offered no clear explanation. She maintains her innocence, appealing her convictions, even as the evidence remains overwhelming. Prosecutors described her as a narcissist who enjoyed the drama of medical emergencies. Others have speculated that she craved control, or that she sought sympathy as the nurse who always seemed to be present during tragedy. Whatever the motive, the result was devastating. Families shattered, lives ended before they had even begun. Today, Lucy Letby sits in a high-security prison. Every day of her life sentence is a reminder of the lives she took and the families she destroyed. She will never walk free. And perhaps the darkest part is this. For more than a year, she operated in plain sight, smiling, reassuring, and telling parents their babies were safe, while secretly plotting their deaths. The evil of Lucy Letby is not in a moment of madness, but in the cold, calculated decision to turn a place of healing into a hunting ground.
Nick, this is the last time I'm going to say it.
May your wife and kids get raped. I'll be up in heaven while y'all rotting in hell.
You have to kill Eileen Warnes because she'll kill again.
Few names in criminal history are as infamous as Eileen Warnes. To some, she was a victim of abuse and neglect, a broken woman failed by everyone around her. To others, she was a cold-blooded predator who lured men to their deaths on the highways of Florida. What's undeniable is that her story became one of the most shocking cases of female serial murder in modern times, ending with her execution in 2002. Eileen Carol Warnes was born in 1956 in Michigan. Her childhood was marked by violence and abandonment. Her father was a convicted child offender who died in prison. Her mother abandoned her at just a few years old, leaving Eileen and her brother to be raised by their grandparents. Those years were filled with instability, abuse, and trauma. By her early teens, she was already homeless, drifting between couches, sleeping in the woods, and surviving by exchanging sex for food, money, or shelter. By her 20s, Eileen was hitchhiking across the country, living on the fringes of society. She had arrests for theft, assault, and weapons possession. But it was in Florida, in the late 1980s, that she began the crimes that would cement her name in history. Between 1989 and 1990, 7 men were murdered along highways across central Florida. Each victim had been shot at close range. Their bodies were discovered abandoned near their vehicles, wallets often missing. At first, investigators believed the killings were unrelated, random acts of violence in a state where crime was already high. But ballistics soon linked the murders. The same gun, the same pattern. The break in the case came when witnesses reported seeing a blonde woman driving one of the victims' cars. That woman was Aileen Wuornos. She was eventually arrested in January 1991 at a biker bar in Daytona Beach. Her lover and partner, Tyree Moore, cooperated with police, secretly recording conversations in which Aileen made incriminating statements.
Why the hell did you do this? Why did you do this? Do it now. Get it over with. Right this very moment. Yes, get it over with.
The trial that followed became a media spectacle. Prosecutors argued that Wuornos had lured men under the guise of sex work before robbing and killing them. They painted her as a manipulative, remorseless killer who used her victims' trust against them. In her own words, she admitted to the murders, but insisted they weren't cold-blooded. She claimed the men had tried to assault her and that she acted in self-defense. But the evidence told a different story. The sheer number of victims, the consistency of the method, and the stolen property all pointed to a pattern of premeditated killings. The jury wasn't convinced by her self-defense claims. In 1992, Aileen Wuornos was convicted of 6 murders and sentenced to death. Even after conviction, Wuornos remained a deeply polarizing figure. Documentaries captured her volatile personality, sometimes raging, sometimes calm, sometimes breaking down in tears. She gave interviews where she confessed fully, admitting she killed the men deliberately, and others where she insisted she had been defending herself. At times, she seemed to relish her notoriety. One of her final interviews, given the night before her execution, showed her rambling about government conspiracies, surveillance, and her belief that she would be taken away on a spaceship. To some, it was proof she had spiraled into severe mental illness. To others, it was simply the final act of a manipulative killer. On October 9th, 2002, Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. She was 46 years old. Her last words were bizarre and unforgettable. She promised she would be back. Witnesses described her demeanor as calm, almost eager to leave the world behind. Her case has left a lasting mark on culture and criminal history. The fascination comes from the contradictions. She was a victim and a killer, a woman shaped by abuse, yet capable of extreme violence, a person who inspired both sympathy and revulsion. What makes Aileen Wuornos stand out is not just the murders, but the way her story forces uncomfortable questions. Was she born evil, or did years of violence and neglect twist her into something she might never have become otherwise? Were her killings calculated, or the desperate acts of someone who saw every man as a potential threat? What cannot be denied is the trail of devastation she left behind. 7 men never went home. Their families were left with unanswered questions and the pain of knowing their loved ones were lured in and murdered on the side of the road. From the landlady who buried her tenants to the nurse who betrayed newborns, these 10 women shattered every expectation of trust and care. They killed, not out of desperation, but with calculation, cruelty, and cold resolve. Their crimes remind us that evil isn't bound by gender. It can smile sweetly, wear a uniform, or promise love, all while hiding its darkest intentions. They are, without question, among the most evil female serial killers in history. If you found this dive into their stories gripping, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next video. And let us know in the comments which case shocked you the most.